and their notations, how these different notations can be used for illustrating or maybe designing a ER diagram for a given data requirement, right? So today we will be taking one or two other scenarios for which we will try to draw a ER diagram. Not draw, we will discuss it because ER diagram is already drawn. And along with it, we will discuss the extended or maybe the next level concept of ER diagram, which is referred as a structural constraints, right? So I hope this is visible to you. Now you can see most of the things which we have discussed in previous labs are already mentioned. So these are for just reference purpose so that you can correlate with it. And there is this concept called structural constraint, right? So structural constraints are something which needs to be provided in some cases, right? So yes, I'm getting some voice from background. A student was having their audio enabled. You need to mute yourself. I mean, any student. I'm not sure who is getting his audio enabled. So kindly, you need to mute yourself. So any student, right? Okay. So these two are important. So after drawing a basic ER diagram, the next thing which you have to define or which we have to add is these two things. First one is called total or partial participation. So let me precisely place as total or partial participation of entities. And then you have to add another details which are referred as min-max value. Min-max value of participation. So right, so both these both constraints are basically we mention on the relationship, right? So it is with respect to participating entities and their participation in a relationship, right? Okay, so let's take, so we will be discussing on these two aspects naturally by having a specific ER diagram. And before that, let's take one particular uh, situation or requirement uh, through which we can again revise the whole ER diagram concept and a practice or kind of activity through which you can identify the different uh, entities, their attributes, and different relationship upon it, right? So today we are considering this scenario or maybe data requirement where there is a need of designing a database for a company, right? And this particular database scenario is being taken from one of the reference book which we have mentioned, which we have shared already. So this example is coming from the textbook, which you should also go for. So this is one of the textbook for this course, right? So the title was Fundamental of Database System, right? It is by Navathe. So this company database is primarily used in this particular textbook for explaining different concepts, whether it is related to SQL or it is related to conceptual schema design, or is it related to the physical schema discussion, right? So this book by Navathe is primarily having this company database as a core example for discussing each and every conceptual thing. So that's why we have taken it. And if you are going to read this book, particular textbook, you can easily understand the correlation and the place of these concepts, right? So let's see what are the data requirements could be for designing a company database, right? So as you can read, the company database keep tracks of the company employee, department, project, right? And it is said, suppose that after the requirement collection and analysis phase, the database designer provides the following description of the mini world. That's what the basic statement. That's what the assumption also. Like initially we have to gather all the requirements and from the mini world naturally. That's what we have taken in the previous lecture. And out of these all the requirements set, we have taken out some requirements which will be helping you to design a database of the part of company that will be represented in database. So basically, this is the reference based on which we can create the database. Now you need to read each and every point or each and every data requirement carefully, because based on these descriptions you can create a database. You can create a conceptual schema first, then the conceptual schema will be mapped into the actual database. So you should design a ER diagram to track each and everything which is written here, right? So let's read it and try to identify primarily three things. First is, let's identify the entities, their possible attributes, and their possible relationship with other entities. So three things we need to capture in the very first instance. So let's read. So the first thing says the company is organized. The company is organized into the departments. So it means department could be the first possible entity, right? Then in the next statement, it said each department has a unique name, a unique number, and a particular employee who manages the department. So with this statement, you can easily spot that what is the possible attributes it could have, right? So it is clearly visible that unique name, unique number, and employee who manages it. So these could contribute for the possible attributes of a department entity, right? Now, if you read further, we keep track of the start date when the employee began managing the department. So this is also giving some hint that you need to maintain a record of a person's joining on the department as a manager, something like that, right? Now, in the last part, a department may have several locations. So it means it shows there is an attribute called location which will be having multiple values. So this attribute location will be a multi-valued attribute for a department entity, right? So by reading simply this first set of requirements, you can easily identify that department is entity. For that, these are the possible attributes, and in some cases there will be some additional attribute differences also, right? Now, if you read the second statement or second requirement, you can read it. A department controls a number of projects. So now, along with the department, you will have possibly next entity, which is called or which may be referred as a project, and each of which means each of project has a unique name, unique number, and a location, and a single location. Let's say it is referring as a single location, means location value for project entity will be a basically single value, right? So it will not be acting as a multi-valued attribute. So let's not mark underscore, right? So these are some possible information which can be used to identify the possible attributes for for the project entity. If we read the next requirement, it says we store each employee's name. So it means employee could be the next possible entity for which we are recording name, social security number, address, salary, gender, and birth date. So these are the possible set of attributes which needs to be captured for an employee entity. Further, if you read, it says an employee is assigned to one department, right? But may work on several projects which are not necessarily controlled by the same departments. We keep track of the current number of hours per week that an employee works on each project, right? So these are some extended or external informations which can be used to define what? Relationship, right? So now you can read, if you read this statement, it says an employee is assigned to one department. So this defines the relationship between department and employee, which says an employee will be assigned to one department. So there must be some relationship between department and employee which captures this information, this entire statement, right? Now, if you read next, it will be an employee may work on several projects. So this defines another relationship between employee and project. And further, it says something like, so similarly in the next statement, if you read, we keep track of the current number of hours per week that employee works on the project. So for this is related to a relationship or maybe some entity attribute. So we will see how this can be placed on a ER diagram. Now, if you read the last statement, it say we also keep track of the direct supervisor of each employee, right? And who is another employee. So this is talking about this possible instance of recursive relationship, right? Where in both sides the entities will be coming from the employee entity, right? So yeah. So basically, this is something important. This is last statement is important because this gives a specific idea about the possibility of recursive relationship. So after reading these three statements of requirement, you can have a basic idea that in this whole scenario, there will be possibly three entities. Now, if you read the last statement, it says, we want to keep track of the dependents of each employee, right? So with this, you can say, there is this entity called dependent whose existence is entirely based on the employee. So yes, there is a possibility of dependent entity, but its existence will be based on employee entity. So dependent will be working as a weak entity, right? And the need of this entity will be for insurance purpose. We keep each dependent first name, gender, birth date, and relationship, right? So this is talking about the possible set of attributes. So with this basic set of information, you can uh, always identify the entities, attributes, and possible relationship, right? So with this set of requirements, let's see what could be the possible ERD could be drawn, right? So if you see it carefully, let me drag it here. Yeah, yes. So if you see this particular ER diagram, this is what we have, I think, discussed also. So this gives, or maybe this captures most of the requirements which are given in the previous set of requirements. So you can read it carefully. So you can see there are four entities: employee, department, project, and dependent. And you should have this idea, and you should have this tendency. So whenever we write entity within the rectangle box, the term or maybe the name of entities are written in the capital letters. Similarly for the relationship names also, which are appearing in the within the diamond boxes. So each and every relationship like works for, manages, works on, control, and supervision dependents of each and every relationship name is written in the capital letters. And this is something a standard procedure also. So during the examination, whenever it is asked to design a ER diagram, you must also write the names of entities in a capital, names of a relationship in capital within the specific structure. Like for entity, the rectangle is a structure. For relationship, it is diamond. For attributes, it is the eclipse. Right? So this is something like that. So these are some standard guidelines for it. So you should always follow these instructions, these templates or these standard notations. Right? Now, if you see entities, you could also see the possible attributes. Like for employee, the attributes are like SSN, birth date, name, and name is further extended into first name, middle name, and last name. Address is there, salary, and gender, right? Similarly, for department, you can see for department, name, number, location is multi-valued, so it is double eclipse. So it is shown as a double ruled eclipse, right? Similarly, for the project, it is name and number and location. For project, location is a single valued, so it is okay. So each project will have only one location. But for department, when we say location is multi-valued, it means it will have more than one location. One department could have two locations, like HR department will be based on Bangalore, HR department based on some other countries. So, right, for some departments, it is multiple locations. Okay, so if you see dependent entity, you can easily spot it is a weak entity because it has been drawn in it has been placed within double dashed rectangles. It means it is a weak entity, and through which relationship it is coming or it is related to employee, it is also shown as a double box or double lined rectangle box. So this also indicates that we have identified a dependent as a weak entity, and it is related to its strong entity employee by this relationship called dependent of, and it is weak. That's why this relationship is also as a weak relationship, something like that. Now, if you see further within the attributes, for each entity, there is at least one attribute which has been marked as a primary key. And the name of this attribute will be underlined. So for employee, SSN is a primary key. That's what we have identified also. So if you read within the requirement, it has been mentioned that for some attribute, it is unique. Like for department, it says that department should have unique department number, project should have project unique number, and for employee it is unique SSN number. So by reading to these requirements instructions, you can easily place or easily identify a certain attribute as a primary key. Right, for department it is name and number because both are unique, so you can always define name and number as a part of primary key. For project it is name and number, so you can always define name and number as a part of primary key. But when it comes to dependent, and dependent is something which rely upon the employee table or employee entity, so it could not have his own primary key, right? Because it's a weak entity, its existence is purely based on the another strong entity employee. So for that, we have declared name attribute as a partial primary key or maybe weak primary key, something like weak primary key, partial key, weak key. There are various terms has been used in the database, but you should have this understanding that a weak entity could not have his own primary key because its whole or entire existence is depends on some other strong entity. So whenever we have set up attributes for weak entity, there are one or two attributes which will be acting as a partial key, right? Partial key, weak key, or maybe any other terms can be used, right? So as far as attribute concerned, things are clear. We have placed all possible attributes. Now, the next thing is the relationship. How we have placed the relationship, how we have defined the relationships, and what are these attributes, why these attributes are placed on the relationship, right? So if you see a relationship between employee and department named as manages, so employee manages department, and this captures one of the requirement. I hope you can recall in the requirement it is mentioned that here itself that for employee and department there are two instances. An employee is assigned to one department, which is like an employee is working for a department, but may be several project. That's one part. Okay, it is given the department like. So it is said that so there is this manages relationship has been given, right? A particular employee who manages the department. So you need to capture this part by using simple relationship instances. So you can see employee manages department. So it defines that each department is managed by a particular employee, right? That's the instance of relationship. That's the definition of the relationship. Okay, there is another relationship between employee and department. So in the very first thing, it says employee works for the department. So you can see it defines the relationship of different employees working on different departments. This is also given in the requirement, right? Similarly, if you see another instance of relationship between department entity and project entity, name is control. It says department controls different projects, right? And there is the instance of relationship between employee and dependent. For this is for a specific purpose. That's what we have discussed as the last requirement. And in very interesting way, if you see, there is this relationship of recursive nature where we see employee supervision is the name of relationship. So employee under supervision for another employee. So this is also an instance of relationship which we are referring as a recursive, because here both sides it will be the employee entity which will be acting upon, right? But you can see there is a terms written on the top, supervisor and supervisee. These are called, these kind of details are called as a relationship role, right? Participation role. So it means, it says that if you're having same entity both side, employee, because of this relationship supervision, this captures that out of all employees, there are some employee who will be acting as a supervisor for other employee. So whenever you draw this kind of relationship, it will become recursive, and you should be precisely placing the name of the role, because we have both side employee entity, so it will create some confusion. So to avoid that, to rectify that, you need to mention the participation role, that one side employee entity is acting as a supervisor, and other side employee entity is acting as a supervisee, something like that. So this gives lot of clarity to the person who is going to create this database, right? So most of the things which are written in the text we have discussed here, and there is one additional thing which we will be discussing now. What are these double lines has been shown, like in the relationship between employee and department. For the relationship works for both sides are connected to double line, right? Whether it is employee side line or whether it is department side, it is double line. Similarly, for the relationship manages, from the department side, it is shown as double line, but from employee, it is single line. That's one part. Similarly, for the department and project control relationship, from the project entity side, it is double line, right? So what are these instances are, like between employee and project for the relationship works on, both sides are shown as double line. So what are these things are? What is the meaning of these notations are, right? That's the one thing which we will be discussing in next moments, or maybe upcoming next 1 or 2 minutes. Before that, you should carefully see the cardinalities. Like for each relationship, this cardinality value has been mentioned, and this is coming from, again, the data requirements. The way the data requirements has been given, it also mention, or it also highlights the participation degree, right? So like you see, between employee and department, for relationship works for, the cardinality is mentioned as 1:n. It shows the more than or maybe n number of employees will be working on one department. Similarly, for employee manages department relationship, it is 1:1. It shows there will be one employee managing one department, right? So this defines the participation degree of an object in the relationship, right, of each entity. Like for department controls project relationship, it is identifying that one department may be controlling more than n or maybe n projects, something like that, right? So this is about, so you need to place, so whenever you are drawing a ER diagram, you should place entities, their respective attributes, and if there is a primary attribute, you need to mention it. If there is a multi-valued, you need to mention it. If there is any derived attribute, then you need to mention it, right? And then you have to define relationship with proper names, and you have to attach this degree of relationship for each relationship in the ER diagram. So writing a proper name for the relationship is one of the important tasks while designing ER diagram, as far as exam concern, as far as overall concern also, right? So whenever you are writing or designing a ER diagram in the examination, you should be carefully identifying or naming a relationship. You should be carefully placing the degree of relationship, 1:n, 1:1, m:2n. So you should read these requirements carefully. Based on that, only these cardinalities are coming, right? Now, last thing which I wanted to discuss here, for some relationship, there are attributes has been placed. So like for employee manages department relationship, this attribute called start date is placed, right? Similarly, for employee works on project hours, as an attribute is placed in the relationship, right? So this is what is coming from the requirement also, because for some cases, it is not clear that this attribute should go to which entity, right? But in the requirement, it is mentioned that this needs to be captured. Like for this employee to manage department relationship, it has been mentioned that you should keep track of the date when employee has started managing the department. So like you can read, we keep track of the start date when the employee began managing the department, right? So sometimes initially it is not clear that which this attribute or maybe this requirement needs to be captured by which aspect, right? So either you can place this start date to employee, but then you have to mention the department number. So sometimes it is not clear that where to place this attribute, which side entity should have this attribute. So in that case, you can always place the attribute on the top of the entity, right? Similarly for the R's also, because employee is connected to a project or employee is working on a project, and it has been clear that one employee may work upon different projects, more than one projects, and in the requirements it is asked that you should capture the total number of hours per week employees working on a project. So you can place this attribute called hours on the top of relationship, because it is not clearly visible that which side is attribute should go, right? So this is something related to a basic ER diagram, right? So you can always extend a ER diagram to the next level, which we will be discussing now. But in the very first instant, you should think about this diagram, this level of diagram. So whenever a data requirement is given to you, you should be thinking about these possible details, which we have right now with us, to be indicated, to be drawn as a basic EIDAR, right? Now, in some cases, it is important to have more detailed representation on this ER diagram. So those are called, or those may be possible by having these some constraints, right? So like if we go to the again the requirements which we are reading from the last 3-4 classes, you can always design a ER diagram for these kind of requirements. And that's what we have mentioned. For one set of data requirements, it is possible to design n ways of ER diagrams, right? So this is something I have taken from the internet. Like for if you paste this simple requirement on the internet or maybe Google, you will get many ER diagrams. Like this is one instance for it. This is another instance of the same requirement equivalent diagram. This is another ER diagram for the same data requirement, right? So similarly, you can also draw a diagram of your own understanding. So there is a possibility of having n number of ER diagrams for a given data requirement, right? So there is no standard ER diagram for a specific data requirement, that you should always remember, right? So you should, that's why I'm saying you should practice it, how to model each and every data requirement into ER diagram by having attribute, by having some relationship, by having a relationship attribute, by having some multi-valued attribute. So each and every requirement aspect should be captured by using these 3-4 ways: entities, relationship, entity attributes, and relationship attributes, some relationship types, right? So these ways you can capture each and every possible given information. Now, if we see, so this is something interesting also. So now, because in some cases it is asked, or maybe it is written in the requirement, that you need to be precisely indicate more details, precisely provide more details into the ER diagram. So one of it is basically the very first instance of it is, can we provide or can we expose the possible participation of an entity in a relationship in more way? Like we right now we are using the cardinality ratios to specify the participation degree, right? Like for relationship employee to department, we are using for works for relationship 1:n as a degree to indicate the participation of each object within identity, right? But in sometimes it is required in a detailed way or maybe more extended way. So you can see the double line box has been shown in some relationship, and this indicates two possible instances. So in a particular relationship, if you see the single line to a certain entity on a relationship, it shows its partial participation, but double line shows a total participation. Its implication is like this. So if you read the employee entity related or in the relationship manages with the department, from employee side it is single line, means it is a partial. It means for this relationship or in this relationship called manages, there are few employees who are not participating in this relationship. So within the employee entity, if there are 100 employees, only few out of these 100 will be participating in this manages relation, right? And if you see from department side, it is total participation, right? It means in the department entity, if we have 3, 4, 5 departments, each and every department object, each and every department instances will be participating in this relationship, right? There is no department which is not being managed by some employee. So from employee entity side, it is total. Each and every object of entity department will be participating in this relationship called manages, right? Similarly, if you read the relationship works for, so in this relationship called works for, the participation is total from both sides. It means there is no employee who is not working for some department. There is no department who is having a department without employee, right? There is another way of understanding it. So when we say there is a total participation, means each and every object or instance of that entity will be participating in this relations, right? So this is how you can understand, this is how you can give more meaning to the ER diagram, and this is how you can emphasize the participation of each entity and its object in particular relationship, right? So this is something called the first advanced feature, or maybe advanced information on the basic ER diagram, which is referred as a structural constraint. And in this is called total and partial participation, right? So in examination, sometimes it is required also. So there will be a specific instruction that you need to convert the data requirement into the ER diagram and also add structural constraint onto it. So it will be explicitly asked in the examination that you should also provide these kind of notations based on the requirements. So you cannot assume and add these notations of total and partial participation, because these are somehow defining the constraints on the participation of each object of an entity, right? So you should always read the requirement, then only you can place it, right? So let's go further also. And if you see, there is another set of constraints which can be used to specifically detail the degree of participation also. Now, initially what we have used the cardinality score as 1:n, 1:1, m:1, m:n, something like that. Now, if some explicit information has been given in the data requirement, you can specify a specific value to these degrees on the relationship, right? And these are often referred as a min-max cardinality on a particular relationship, right? So if you see again the same ER diagram I am using. So if you read it carefully, let's take the very first instance of a relationship. Now you can see employee manages department, and for this what we have observed, the observation was in this relationship there is a partial participation from employee side, there will be a total participation for department side. Now you have to see carefully in the employee side, where we are saying employee will be acting as a manager. Now manager is also appearing here. It means we have mentioned the role of the participation. When employee will be participating in this relationship, manage as a manager, right? And from department, the role will be department managed, right? But if you see carefully, there's a value called 0, 1, right? Now degree of participation has been simplified here. So it shows that there are some employees who are not participating in the relationship, and there are few employees who are participating but with degree 1. It means they are participating with only one instance, right? So this is correctly verified. So if you see the participation of employees objects listed under this employee entity, they could participate with degree 0 or 1, right? That's what the meaning of having min-max value as 0, 1 from employee side into the entity or into the relationship managed. But from department side, it shows that this role will be, or this participation will have min-max constraint as 1, 1. It means one department object can have maximum one employee attached to it, and minimum it is one, right? So this specify a specific participation of an object on its min and max value. But if you see, the employee works for relationship with department. Here you can see the min-max constraint is specified as 1, 1 from employee side into the relationship works for, and 4, n min-max participation from the department side. It means from employee instance concern, any employee instance can have maximum and minimum participation as one. Means one employee may work min and max into one department, right? But from department side, you can read 4, n means one department can have at least or should have at least 4 employees and maximum n number of employees. That's what the is today also, right? So these are something they like for department side, it is said as 4, n. So these information will be given into the requirements. So based on the requirements, data requirements only, we can specify these kind of values, which specifies the minimum value for the participation, maybe maximum value for the participation, right? So if it is stated in the data requirements that a department can have at least 4 and at most 20 employees, so it will be 4, 20, right? Similarly, if you read the requirement on the employee works on project relationship, so you can see here from employee side it is 1, n and role will be worker, and from project side it will be project as a role and cardinality constraint will be 1, n. So it means one employee can work on more than, can work on n projects, but at least he should work on one project. Similarly, from project side, it is like that. One project may have at least one employee and at most n number of employee onto it, right? So this is how you can specify the different min-max constraint value on the place of cardinality. So basically what we say in a basic ER diagram, you should mention the cardinality, right? After defining the relationship, you should always add a relationship cardinality, like 1:1, 1:n, n:1, or m:n. But when it is explicitly asked you to mention these degrees to these cardinalities, these constraints, so if in the question it is mentioned that you need to provide the structural constraints, so you should add two things. First is what we have discussed previously. You need to mention the total and partial participation on the relationship of entities, and you need to also provide these kind of splits on the min-max value of relationship cardinality based on the information given, right? You cannot assume anything and mention it. You should always see the data requirements for specific information based on which you can define a min-max constraint on a specific relationship, right? So that is it for today's class. Now, if you have anything to raise or to discuss, you can just let me know.